The Objective. To deliver the NBA to you like no other. News. Play breakdowns. Power rankings. Storylines you never hear talked about. Anywhere else. It's all straight shots here. Fired by straight shooters. S and Gunn. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here. Lauren joining me as always. Lauren, how was your weekend?
It was wonderful. My 6-pick parlay on the Nuggets Lakers game hit, so that was nice. a good little boost. And okay. I'm enjoying the 3-0 leads. I'm enjoying them. Let's just say that.
Well, you know what? Since we're here, I am glad you mentioned parlays because it is the playoffs, ladies and gentlemen. Get in the game, make your next bet with Sports Interaction. Bet before the game or live and play on all your favorite teams' matchups. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. 19 plus, please play responsibly. And you mentioned 3-0 leads. We are in a conference finals battle that is consisting of 3.30 leads. Look, last night, the Miami Heat absolutely obliterated the Boston Celtics in Miami. It felt like they were up by 1,000,000 points. I mean, at one point, it really was that way. And, you know, it felt like the biggest collapse we've seen since the Miami Heat did something similar to the Bucks a couple of rounds ago. Mm-hmm. I find it interesting that there's a lot of ways that we can tackle this discussion around the Boston Celtics, what will happen. Obviously, for the people who may not know, no team in the NBA has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit, ever. In any playoff round, in any playoff series, there's never been a comeback from a 3-0 deficit. And now the Celtics are down 3-0 and the Lakers are down 3-0, which means that in all likelihood, in the most likely outcome here, I would say 99% chance, maybe more, 99.99% chance, is that we will have a Denver Nuggets versus Miami Heat NBA Finals. We will be previewing that once these two series are over, but I think we have enough here to talk about what the hell went wrong with the Boston Celtics, how this thing collapsed, how this thing ended up being as bad as it did, because in my opinion, I thought this would be a competitive series regardless, Lauren. I really thought that, you know, given Miami, the way that they've looked throughout these playoffs, Spo being the adjuster that he is, Jimmy looking incredible, Bam, I'm writing about him today. You'll see that on SDPN a couple hours from now. I really did think that Miami would be able to put up a good fight. Mm-hmm. But I ultimately thought the Celtics' offensive firepower was just too much to deal with. It hasn't been the case. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have struggled immensely in this series. I think credit to Miami's, you know, defensive structure, the way they're aggressively helping, the way they're trying to cause turnovers, get out in transition. A lot of that is important. But I guess from your perspective, like, what string do you pull first from this collapse of the Celtics? Like, what angle do you think is the most, hey, let's talk about this, you know?
Yeah. Well, because it can also be tied to the off season, I kind of want to look at the two leaders, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, because as we've watched this series and we have talked about Miami and the things that, like, I mean, you just mentioned, but also like the guys like Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, these guys that have been stepping up and really just playing well in their role on a night-to-night basis, allowing Miami to be in there. When you're looking at Boston, I keep going back and forth on, is this more of the Celtics dropping this so significantly, or are we not giving enough credit to the Miami Heat? But focusing on the Celtics, I know Coach Joe Mazzulla is getting a lot of flack right now, but I do think that you do have to hold your two stars accountable when you get when your team just gets dismantled the way that they have in this series. And so given kind of the direction that things could take this offseason, I do think there should be a big discussion about Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And you kind of have had two back-to-back performances in the playoffs, back-to-back years that have been disappointing. So where does that leave you moving forward?
It's interesting because, like, Tatum and Brown both have a plethora of playoff experience. It's crazy because they're young. They're still young
Mhm.
players. But because they've been on good teams for virtually all of their careers, they've had an ample amount of experience in the playoffs. None of this can be attributed to, oh, they are not built for the moment. They are not ready for the moment. These two have been preparing for a very long time. I mean, they made it to the NBA Finals last year. A lot of times when you think about, and this applies to the Nuggets, this applies to a lot of future and past NBA champions, NBA finalists, you have to sort of take your bumps in the playoffs. You have to lose a couple times in
Mhm.
order to get over the hump. That
Right.
happened to the Bucks a couple of years ago. You know, they lost to Toronto, they lost it to Miami, and then they ended up going to the NBA Finals and winning it all. I know as a person who's covered the Raptors, you know, they had to take their bumps in the playoffs. And yes, there's trades and things that happen to improve the roster. But overall, like, you need to learn how to fail in the playoffs. And I don't
Absolutely.
want to bring up the failure point here because it's like, hey,
A
anybody
little sensitive
talk,
subject.
yeah, apparently in the
Did
NBA,
you use that word?
apparently in the NBA, it's a very sensitive subject. But no, I think
Yeah.
you have to take your bumps in the playoffs. The Celtics have taken their bumps. They have bumped all around. They have lost in the conference semis. They have lost in the conference finals twice to the Miami Heat now after this series. And they obviously made it to the NBA finals, losing to the Warriors. I just think there is a level. So I look at this from both sides where it's like, yes, you can say, how many more times are we going to run it back with this core? How
Mhm.
many more times are we going to believe that this is enough to get there? And then on the other side, it's like, these two guys are good enough to win an NBA championship together. And I'm
Mhm.
of the opinion that it doesn't really, like, there's no, a lot of people say that they don't work well together, that they don't, their styles are contradictory, or the fact that they play similar positions, et cetera, it makes it harder, or the fact that they have similar skill sets, right? None of them are elite playmakers. None of them are great passers. Defensively, they're both, you know, pretty good, but like they have their lapses.
Mhm.
They're both jump shot reliant at times as well. So I can understand that from an overlap perspective. But at the same time, I wouldn't break up a core just because of that. I think it's
Yeah.
about figuring out how you're going to retool around these two. And you mentioned the offseason side of things. Mark Stein mentioned this in his report today that Jaylen Brown is Supermax eligible. Jason Tatum is also Supermax eligible. And combined, once they sign their extensions, they would be making $600 million. $600 million.
That is insane.
It's insane. It is. And I think, you know, personally, me, I'm not the highest on Jaylen Brown as a player in general. I think he's a very, very good player. He can be a secondary star. He can be maybe even a tertiary star. He's a great scorer. He's a great release valve. He's athletic. He can do some of the things that you can expect. I don't think of him as a number one option on a championship level team. I also am wary of calling him a 1B, you know, like how
Yeah.
he is in Boston right now. I just think that there are ways that you can work around this roster to make it better. They have things that they can move around. Maybe it's about switching out Al Horford for someone else and finding something else there. They brought in Malcolm Brogdon to be that pacemaker, that guy who can be that floor general. He's been good, 6th man of the year, but it hasn't been enough there.
Right.
And I think their guard rotation of Marcus Smart and, you know, Malcolm Brogdon and Derek White, it still leaves a little bit to be desired on the playmaking front. Even though
Right.
Marcus Smart has improved, Brogdon has improved. I don't know what the way out here is, but I wouldn't say breaking them up is the way to go.
Yeah, I share that same sentiment because I think of, and I'm kind of with you on the Jaylen Brown 1B versus number 2. I kind of lean more number 2, and maybe that has more to do with how the Celtics are structured and the dominance of Jason Tatum than it does Jaylen Brown. We haven't seen him in another system, so we don't fully know. But when I'm looking at this duo, on one hand, I kind of try to think about the functionality of it with Kawhi and PG. It's like, oh, you've got these two other guys that can handle the ball, two-way players, but yet, and granted, one duo has been around a lot longer than the other, but it's like we don't even really compare the two. And it's kind of
problems though. right? So,
Yes, yes. And so I think it's interesting how when you talk about roster construction around two kind of 6'7", 6'8" versatile duo, like a duo like that, I would be interested to see where they go because I'm with you. I think kind of having the two-way guard rotation of Brogdon, White, and Smart, you do kind of need more playmaking, someone that can like slow the pace down. And that can just be a veteran guy. It doesn't need you don't need to go out and get someone crazy. But I think that looking at the Al Horford, Robert Williams, kind of that is where that they can maybe significantly improve because Al has been really phenomenal at times. Robert Williams has been really great at times. But this group, like you mentioned, sixth man of the year, Marcus Smart, incredible defensive player, Derek White, incredible defensive player. And then you have these two. So it's like, what's happening? How is this not happening? And so
how is it not working? Right?
Exactly. And so I think if you're looking at that starting lineup, it's either got to be you got to have more identity with the bigs or with the guards, because if you're not going to move on from Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, which I don't think anyone thinks that they will, maybe there's the questions with Jaylen Brown, but I don't see that blowing up right now. And so to me, it's got to be the playmaking or the big. And I think as of right now, the more likely is the playmaking.
Yeah. Look, I know people will be jumping at the chance to blame Joe Mazzulla, and I don't think he's a perfect coach. I think there are very clear warts to what he does. The not using timeouts when the opposing team is on a run, the fact that his adjustments might be a step late, et cetera, et cetera. I think those are very, very clear demarcate. Like it's a very clear. How am I wording this incorrectly? It's very clear that he's a rookie head coach. It's very clear that he's still learning on the job. He's still learning on the fly. We had that quote from Marcus Smart a couple of weeks ago where he's like, "Oh, I'm proud that Joe is doing this. He's figuring this out. I'm happy for him." And that quote got kind of like pulled into a million different directions. But I think to his point, he's still learning. He's still figuring it out. I understand the Celtics are in a position where they can afford to have a coach who's still trying to figure things out. I get that from a Celtics fan perspective. But this loss last night can't be blamed on Joe Mazzulla. And I know Mazzulla did it. Look, he said in his post-game press conference, he said, yeah, that's where I have to be better, figure out where this team needs to make sure they're connected, they're physical, they're together on the floor. And then he consistently said after every question, it's on me, it's on me, it's on me. I appreciate that type of accountability from a coach.
Right.
I think his players probably appreciate that type of accountability from him as well. But I don't think he was the reason last night. He obviously has made adjustments throughout the series. Changing the starting lineup, moving Derek White in instead, going a little bit smaller. He made the adjustments in the Philly series as well. I think they've done different things to try and make it harder on Miami, but it's been to no avail. And I think a lot of that goes back to the execution of the players. It's guys who aren't in tune with each other. Like he said, I didn't get them connected. I think that's such a huge telling piece. It's like, this team lacks the cohesion that the Miami Heat do. And the Miami Heat, on the other hand, are one of the most cohesive groups we've seen of this last generation. Maybe the most cohesive group. The fact that they can kind of rally together, be so connected defensively, be on the same page defensively with the amount of things that they want to do. They switch a lot. They switch from man-to-man and zone a lot. They do like different defensive coverages depending on where the angle of the screen is from. So like the Heat are going to throw so many different things at you, and that's why they're in the position they are to be one win away from the NBA Finals. They were flexible when it came to the Milwaukee Bucks. They made it hard on them against New York in a muddy series that felt like it was a grind. They found a way to grind out games. And then in this series, they're really using Boston's dependence on the three-point line to their advantage. Eric Spoelstra will find, and I don't want to attribute too much to coaching because, the guys at the end of the day have to execute. That goes for Joe Mazzulla. That goes for Eric Spoelstra. But Spo is getting these guys to pick out one of the fatal flaws of a team and then increase it to the umpteenth degree. They are really turning up the notch on how bad of a flaw or a crutch that is. For the Celtics, I wrote it in the preview. It's been this way all season, but they are so heavily reliant on the three-point shot. They make threes, they are a good team. They don't make threes, they are a bad team. It really is that easy for them sometimes. And the Heat have done a great job of limiting their 3-point opportunities. They're walling off the paint. Bam Adebayo has done a great job of doing this. Jimmy Butler has done a great job of doing this. They wall off the paint. It stops Miami's dribble penetration. It stops the drive and kick. And now this way, Boston can't generate open looks.
Mhm.
That is the way that Miami is beating this team right now and beating them handedly.
Yeah.
So I think this is more a credit to how good Miami has been and how cohesive they are as a group defensively than it is Boston. But I mean, it's fair to be worried and be concerned if you're a Celtics fan, because this is
troublesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to say real quick, and I kind of started to hint at it earlier, but going into this series, I severely underestimated the impact of Caleb Martin and what he has been for them this series, because going into it, one of my biggest questions is, how is Miami going to handle the depth and then just the firepower at the top of the roster? How are they going to match up and kind of try and slow down Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown? And I'm like, okay, yeah, you got Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin, and you've got guys that, I mean, even Bam and his kind of help protection. You've got guys that are good and are functional, but the way that they have been able to manipulate, like you said, how they've been able to manipulate from a defensive perspective has been really, really impressive. So I think that they do deserve quite a bit of credit there.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens, because yeah, again, like, I'm not trying to write off. It's over though. Like, realistically,
I would say over. If they were close and it looked, because Reggie Miller said something, and I can't believe I'm bringing this up right now, but Reggie Miller said that the only person on the Boston Celtics that has shown anything is Grant Williams when he tried to get in Jimmy Butler's face, and that he hasn't really seen much of anything in terms of competitiveness, just fire from the Celtics. Yeah. Like, where are they? And as crazy as it sounds, I agree with that. I agree that, okay, like, when you're looking at the body language, the facial expressions, you're kind of just like, is anybody going to bounce back? You've got tons of veterans over there, and it just, you're waiting for like the swing, you're waiting for the dominant run, and it just never comes. And so that's why I think it's over. I mean, yeah, it's 3-0, but like, if there was anything to hang your hat on, maybe, but I haven't seen it.
No, there really hasn't been much. There really hasn't been much to hang your hat on if you're a Celtics fan. You have to look to see how you improve. And like we mentioned off the top, I really do think it's about running it back. I don't think you can. This season has been weird, man. It really has been weird. The parity that we've seen throughout the league is showing its face. And I think it's funny to me that the Celtics and the Bucks are now in a position where they have to do some self-reflection, and both of those teams were the two best teams in the NBA in the regular season. They looked like far and away like these guys are surefire championship contenders. These are the ones that like everybody has to go up against, and yet both teams will have to do a considerable amount of self-reflection. And I don't know if that means overhauling things. I think the Bucks obviously had more of a reason to let go of Coach Bud. It had been a while. It had been a minute before, they kind of, things were brewing that way anyways. It was going that direction. And Milwaukee has tons of questions that they have to answer in the offseason as well. Chris Middleton is a free agent. Brook Lopez is a free agent. They have, this aging roster around Giannis. So they have to address their flaws as well. But I think with Boston, they're in a very peculiar situation where it's like they have tried this formula so many times. And they have not gotten to the place where they've wanted to. And now you have to do some self-reflection in a more molecular way. You have to be like, hey, is Brown and Tatum what we want to build from? And on top of that, let's say we do want to split it up. What is the way to split this up to continue being a contender? Because the question here is, okay, so let's say, obviously Brown is the odd man out here. I think that is very clear. Let's say they say, okay, we want to trade Jaylen Brown. Where? To what? Does Jaylen Brown for Pascal Siakam make them any better? I would say not really. Maybe it's a nicer fit, but no, I don't think it makes them any better than what they are positioned to be right now. Do you agree?
But, I don't. But I'm sitting here thinking about this now, because at first I was like, yeah, who are they going to go trade for? But now I'm like, Damian Lillard.
Right. Well, okay, yeah, sure. So let's say Dame, okay? And I think Dame is interesting because like the Blazers have stressed this 1,000,001 times that they would rather pair Dame with Jaylen Brown in Portland than they would, the other way around.
100%.
So I don't know. I agree that Dame would be an excellent fit against, with Boston and with Tatum, but it's just like, hey, how do you get that to happen? I don't know.
I think
I don't see
just
the
real
selling
quick,
point there.
I will
Yeah.
say real quick on this because I'm with you. I think obviously Portland would rather do that, but I think that there's a real argument to be had of would you rather have a core of Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp,
Scoot
Brandon Miller,
Henderson.
or
Yeah,
Scoot
right, yeah.
and Jaylen Brown, or would you rather have, you know what I mean? So I do
Yeah.
think I wonder how big that conversation will be this offseason.
Yeah. And like from Dame's perspective, maybe this is the chance to
Maybe,
be,
maybe he says, you know what, this is my opportunity. This is the team. This is the situation that I think that I'm okay with going to.
right.
But that's a big if. So
On a smaller scale, I would be interested if the Celtics decided going for a guy like Chris Paul. I know it's wild, but like, hey, you need that type of floor general, managing the clock, managing possessions type. And while Chris Paul is far from what he has been, in past years, and obviously he's been an MVP candidate before in his life, I just think maybe that's the type of guy you need. And it's hard to find those guys. Though there's not that many players in the NBA that can do similar things to a Chris Paul, a Kyle Lowry, to a lesser extent, it's like a Tyus Jones. Like, that's the type of point guard they need. That's the type of game manager I think I would look for if I was the Celtics. But what's out there, how to get that, and is breaking up Brown and Tatum the answer to that? I'm not sure. Money wise, it'll get very hard.
Yeah, that's gonna be the tricky part.
We'll see. We'll see what happens Boston offseason. We obviously have tons of time to talk about that. Miami is going to be very, very interesting as well going into the finals. I mean, as the 8th seed, first time since 1999. It's party like it's 1990. But yeah, it's going to be a crazy, crazy couple of weeks. And I know there will be a lot of deliberation and conversation about the Celtics. So I want to talk about the other side of this, the other 3-0, which is the Lakers and Nuggets. Nuggets are going to most likely be heading to their first NBA Finals in franchise history, which is fitting because, hey, Carmelo Anthony is going to be retiring as well. We'll get into that in a little bit. But, so the Nuggets are going to be headed to the Finals, most likely against the Heat. Again, we'll preview that series later on this week. But from the Lakers' perspective, I think you can look at this and say that, hey, this season was a whirlwind. This is sort of opposite to the Celtics, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like the Celtics, they had a great season, a lot of, like, they did show their fatal flaws throughout the season. And there were stretches that Boston had where I sort of questioned how much of a contender they were. Like, they lost 2 home games against the Magic when both teams were fully healthy. And I was like, why did that happen? Orlando's a fun team and they pose as a matchup problem, but like, a championship contender shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
So that was something that jumped out to me in the regular season to make me think like, I'm not sure how good this team really is. And then in the playoffs, they show you, they play with their food against the Atlanta Hawks. They forced, the Hawks forced them to 6 games. They played with their food against the Sixers. The Sixers forced them to 7 games. And now, with facing a team that doesn't let people play with their food in the Miami Heat, Heat took care of business. They're not going to let you sit and relax. That's what the Miami Heat won't let you do. So let's talk about the Lakers, which is the opposite side of that, which is they started out the season 2-10. They fought to stay near 500, even with Russell Westbrook, even with those other guys. They fought to stay at 500. They convinced front office to essentially go all in, if you will. They still have some assets, so it's not technically all in. But now they have this rejuvenated core. Obviously Austin Reeves has shown to be a third cog to what this Lakers team is. He's been incredibly important. And I expect, even Mark Stein reported it today, that like it is all but certain that Austin Reeves will be returning to the Lakers this season. He's going to be re-signed. He's going to get that contract extension. There's no question about it. And then on the other side of things, when it comes to how they approach this offseason, with the amount of guys that they have to deal with. So Jared Vanderbilt is a team option. Jared Vanderbilt is locked in for 1 more year. Malik Beasley is a team option. D'Angelo Russell is a free agent. Rui Hachimura is a restricted free agent. Austin Reeves is a free agent. So they have a lot of decisions to make. But I think they're in a much better position than they were going into the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the only question that I have is like, do you go for that star? Do you figure out a way? They have their 2029 first round pick,
Mm-hmm.
but do they go star hunting, or do they refine this roster even more around Reeves, Braun, and AD and try to go from there? Is Reeves their third star, essentially, is what I'm saying?
It's a good question. I am not 100% sold on Reeves yet. I know there are a lot of people that have that confidence in him. I am personally not there yet. I'm not saying I can't be, but right now, no. So it's hard for me to envision that they're completely content with him being this quote unquote third star, but the path to go get a third star and bring in Austin Reeves, or bring back Austin Reeves, is very challenging. And so I see the more likely scenario being them refine the roster. Like you mentioned, they have the 2029 pick, but they also have a first round pick in this draft. So I think that they have pathways and they have options to better refine the roster. And they've seen enough, I think, from Rui, from Jared Vanderbilt, from some of these guys. I think D'Angelo Russell and Malik Beasley, that could get a little bit interesting on, if they want to bring them back, how they want to go about that. That could get interesting, but I think both of those guys, I would say Malik more than D'Lo, both of those guys are replaceable. I would bring back Malik Beasley, but at that dollar amount, I don't know if they view that as worth it. But when you're talking about star hunting or going for making the Kyrie play, obviously I have a little bit of bias there, but I do think it would be very challenging for them to financially, Austin Reeves and Kyrie Irving. That is very difficult. And then also moving off of Rui Hachimura just to make the space for Kyrie, and then to sign Austin Reeves with the bird rights, that's a lot of money, and that's just challenging overall. And so I'm not sure that that's necessarily the path for them. It was also reported that the Mavs, or it was a rumor, but the Mavs and Kyrie supposedly have this handshake deal on a max contract, so that comes into play with what the Lakers want to do. I feel like the answer for them, move forward.
How much are we trusting a handshake with Kyrie? He probably fingers crossed behind him.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you can never be too sure. You can never be certain. But like I've said from the time the Kyrie trade happened, I think Kyrie knows that he can pretty much get whatever deal he wants from Dallas. So I anticipate him getting that. But I think with the Lakers, there will be options for them, especially with the performance that they've had this postseason and how they've turned the season around. I think there will be enough guys out there in the MLE kind of range, even on the vet minimum range, who are going to be willing to come in. Like take Lonnie Walker for an example. Lonnie Walker has been solid, and he took a big pay cut to come in, even though he's still young, he's still intriguing to come play for the Lakers. So I think they'll have options there, and that will be ultimately their best path forward.
So there's a couple of ways to tackle this, and I love the way you did it. I think you have to look at obviously the top of the roster with AD and LeBron and say, okay, can they replicate what they have been able to do throughout the season and throughout the postseason? AD has been phenomenal. He's looked like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Best defense he's ever played in his career. His offense has wavered. Yes, alternating days. Everybody makes the jokes, I know. But I think you have to find ways to make life easier on those two in the regular season so that they can be at their best in the postseason. They tried to do that with Russell Westbrook because Russell Westbrook is a guy who can get you to regular season wins. It's just that it didn't mesh, on the court, whether it was spacing, whether it was passing, ideology, all that stuff. It didn't make sense court on the just schematically, right?
Mm-hmm.
You going out and saying, okay, AD is our guy. This is the guy we're building around. And LeBron James this postseason has also sort of looked human. Like he's had great performances. He had that Game 6 performance against the Warriors that, finished them off. He was really, really great against the Grizzlies as well in a couple of games. But there have been games where he's looked human, where he's looked like a 38-year-old man playing in his 20th year of basketball. And I think finding ways to make it easier on LeBron. Austin Reeves is one of those ways. He's a guy who can handle some of the ball handling pressure, some of the playmaking pressure. They're probably going to put the ball in his hands even more next season once he's re-signed. And I think that's a solution right there because you're making it so that LeBron's, task in the regular season is a little bit less. His load is a little bit less in the regular season, and he can move forward. The other side of this, like in the back of my brain, is LeBron is playing through a foot injury. Like, yes, he's struggled a little bit in these playoffs. He's looked human in these playoffs, but also how much of that is the foot? How much is that is essentially 3 doctors telling him you have to get foot surgery and him saying, nah, I'm playing anyways. Like, what is the impact of that type of injury? So maybe he isn't as, quote unquote, washed as he might look in a couple days. Yeah. So I guess my question is, like, how much do you still believe in LeBron and AD to be that core of a championship team, especially at their age, especially with the mileage that they have? And then on top of that, for the Lakers, how do you address that in the regular season to make it easier on them? Re-signing Reeves, like you mentioned, they probably re-sign Hachimura as well. Okay, now that's a nucleus. You have Malik Beasley. I imagine Jared Vanderbilt on his deal also stays. Mm-hmm. But you have to figure out another way to work this out. And maybe D'Lo is the answer here. He's had some good games in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. He's brought them back into games. I remember, I think it was game 4 or game 3 against the Warriors, where he essentially just brought them back and won the game for them. So he's been important. His shot making is super important to them. But can you find that elsewhere? Can you find that in a more consistent source? Obviously, people are going to bring up Kyrie, and I don't think that ends up happening. Mm-hmm. But where else can you get that from? How else can you find that source of offense that can keep you going in the regular season? I think that's where the Lakers' questions lie. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. It's difficult because you can't really compare LeBron James and the aging with any other scenario or any other player in history, at least in my opinion, and kind of what to expect from season to season. But you have to kind of expect that he's going to gradually continue to take steps back, whether it be availability, performance, consistency, whatever. But at the same time, I think that from the Lakers' standpoint, you have to have full faith. As long as LeBron James says he wants to be there, you have to have full faith that duo, that core is enough to get you there and keep you in contention status. So I think the key for them will kind of be looking around the league at maybe scenarios that have played out, whether it be looking at some of the contracts that they're going to have and some of the guys that could become available. It's crazy. This is going to sound maybe a little bit crazy, but to me, it seems like whenever the Lakers end up negotiating, they get some sort of league-wide discount that everyone else is just not privy to. So I'm not going to be surprised if some veteran who is just, their situation has run its course, whether it be in Chicago, all of a sudden comes available, and all of a sudden the Lakers are in play for that player, whether it be like a DeMar DeRozan or any of these big name guys. Again, that's a lot of money that you're going to have to come up with. But I think that there are going to be tons of situations, whether it be approaching the trade deadline, or during the offseason via trade with that first round pick that they have this year, going out and finding the veteran offensive minded contributor is going to be ultimately what I think is their path forward. Not as much in free agency. I don't think that going out, while I think that they can get guys to refine the roster, I think getting that guy that's going to help them throughout the regular season is not going to come in free agency.
Yeah, I agree. I think you actually brought up a good point with Chicago. Like, if you're Chicago, would you take D'Lo plus the 2029 first round pick, which is the one the Lakers have, plus their pick this year because they still have their pick, and hey, give us Zach LaVine, give us a DeMar, one of the, either one of those.
I think the D'Lo with him being expiring, it's kind of difficult, but I do think that like the timing of how all that will work with draft night and the Stepien rule, I'm not 100% sure how that will work out, but they've got guys that are on these somewhat sizable deals where they can put the money together to get closer to DeMar more than Zach. Zach's going to be a little bit difficult, but again, you bring Malik Beasley back. There's then that little time frame with the recently signed, all that, but you can get to the trade deadline. And if all of a sudden Chicago is like, you know what, we tried, it's not working, then I absolutely think both of those players could be in play for the Lakers.
We'll see. We will see. It's going to be a very, I've kind of beat the same drum every time we've talked about a team that's about to get eliminated, but it's going to be a very interesting offseason because there's not that many great free agents.
Right.
The free agency class is pretty lackluster. I doubt that there's anything, drastic that happens with the class as well, like any shocking signings, especially with the teams that do have money. Like the teams that have money are Houston and San Antonio and Detroit and Indiana. Like I very much so doubt that those teams are going to make big splashes. Maybe Houston does. Maybe Houston does with James Harden and the news that he might be getting $200 million in 4 years. That's pretty crazy. But hey, maybe Houston does make a big splash and turn into a playoff contender. But I doubt that there's going to be too much crazy noise around free agency this year, which makes me think that there's going to be a lot of trades.
Absolutely.
And especially with the new CBA coming in, the way teams manage that, it'll be very, very interesting how the Lakers, who are a team that's like hovering near tax territory, is going to approach that. And how the Celtics, who are also a team that, hey, has to deal with the Supermax stuff with Brown and Tatum, how they're going to approach that. I've beat this drum a bunch of times with the Suns and with the Bucks and everybody else who's been eliminated. It is going to get increasingly hard to keep these expensive guys on your roster. It's hard to have 3 of them. And I think in the Lakers situation, when you add Reeves' contract, now you have Reeves, LeBron, and AD, and that's your trio. Like that is the 3 that you are building around. So it'll be interesting. I don't know what'll happen, but who knows? Toss up. But it seems like the Celtics and Lakers are both headed towards elimination, as the Inside the NBA TNT crew says they are going fishing. And that's it for them. Some side stories, some side news, just some things that we can talk about before this all we wrap up this podcast. Carmelo Anthony has announced retirement after a 19-season career. Carmelo is look, a lot of people will bring him up as one of the guys that, had an illustrious career but never won an NBA championship, but he had one hell of a career. Obviously, he was drafted 2003. He was the 3rd overall pick, I think, something.
Yep,
the second,
3rd.
Yeah, 3rd overall pick. And he had a very, very great career. I mean, I grew up watching that era of basketball. The Nuggets with Melo were just such a fun team. The Billups year, the Iverson year, them going to the Western Conference Finals, facing Kobe, countless game winners from Melo, the J.R. Smith days with him. And, there's a lot of like childhood memories for me watching Melo and enjoying that team. The powder blue jerseys are iconic jerseys. So I can't say anything but the fact that this man is a legend when it comes to things. He's going to go down first ballot Hall of Famer. Just to kind of recap everything that he's done in his career, he's 9th all-time in scoring. He obviously won an NCAA championship with Syracuse in 2003, won the most outstanding player of the Final Four that year, freshman player of the year. His numbers retired at Syracuse. And then in the NBA, he went on to be a 10-time All-Star, 6-time All-NBA, 1-time scoring champion, all-rookie team. He played for playoff teams on the Nuggets, the Knicks, the Thunder. There's a lot there to enjoy from Carmelo. And I know that there's going to be such a massive conversation about like, oh, he never won a ring. How great is his legacy really, et cetera, et cetera. But I really want to stress that like winning is very hard in the NBA.
It's so hard.
Like
you have to have so many things go right.
So many things shake your way. And on top of that, you need to be on teams that are willing to invest and willing to get you to that point. He really had his best chance against the Nuggets when he was at his heyday, when he was in his prime, when he was with the Nuggets and they went out facing off against the Lakers. That was probably his best opportunity to ever win an NBA title. They fell short of that. But does that make him any less of a player? Does that make him, not as great? I think that's an unfair way to look at things because of how hard it is. You look at the Charles Barkleys of the world, the Steve Nashes of the world, the John Stocktons, Carmelones, although those guys, whatever. You look at these guys who haven't won rings, and I don't think you can take away anything from their career because of the fact that they haven't been NBA champions. Anything you'd like to say on the Melo front?
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo and agree with when you're talking about a legacy, you can't just, okay, rings, yes or no, how many, like that cannot be one or the biggest factor, I think, when kind of talking about someone's legacy. I mean, Melo is 9th in all-time scoring. I think a lot of people think about, oh, he never won the ring, Denver, New York. There were a lot of years in New York where they were good, but maybe not. There were questions about how far they could go. But when you think about the offensive talent and just how special Melo was, I mean, you can never take that away. And so I think it's I tweeted it earlier, but it is sad when somebody officially hangs it up. But you know, you never know what's next for Melo. He's got a son out there who's working, so you just never know. You never know what's next.
Do you have like a favorite moment from Melo by any chance? Any like career moment? Oh, do you? Yeah.
I do, because I remember it so clearly. He had a buzzer beater over Dallas that I remember. He was on the right wing, free throw extended, and he just absolutely, and it was like one of those plays where it's right at the end of the game and you just know Melo's getting the ball and you know it's going in. As soon as the shot went up, it was like the slowest thing I've ever seen. And of course it went in. Of course we lost. And that one hurt. I remember that one hurting. But it was the glory days of the powder blue jerseys, and it just was what it was.
Yeah. I look, there's a lot of memories that I can bring up with Melo. Obviously the 2000 and like the Western Conference Finals run with Kobe, versus Kobe. I mean, you can go and watch those highlights. Genuinely some of the most fun basketball highlights that you can pull up. But there's also like the 62 in the Garden. He had this crazy game against the Bulls in the playoffs where he was just going shot for shot for shot. There's a lot of incredible moments to Melo's career, and like, I think that should be cherished. It should be appreciated. He is an all-time legend. He's going to go down. I really hope the Nuggets retire his jersey. This is a side note on this, because obviously things didn't shake out the way they wanted it to in Denver. He didn't leave on the best of terms, but I really do hope that Denver is, good enough to be able to retire his jersey, because that 15 powder blue is one of the most iconic jerseys of all time. People were wearing it like crazy. Yeah. So, okay. One more final news note. Adrian Wojnarowski reported that it is Nick Nurse, Kenny Atkinson, and Adrian Griffin, Raptors assistant coach Adrian Griffin, who are the 3 finalists for the Bucks job. Very interesting, because Nurse versus Griffin going for the same job. Funny, but I think ultimately it's going to go to Nurse.
Yeah.
But he also did mention that Nurse is being considered for the Suns gig and the Sixers gig. So I imagine he has his pick of the litter. It's like, who do you want to coach? Do you want to coach Giannis for, the rest of his prime? Or do you want to coach Embiid for the rest of his prime? I know Nurse and Embiid have butted heads a bunch. Do you want to coach KD and Booker for the rest of their primes? So it's interesting. I think Nurse probably has his pick at this point, like which way he would like to go. I don't know what's going to happen, but I would imagine that Milwaukee ends up being the place that he goes. Where do you see that happen?
I tend to kind of say the same. I feel like Monty is just destined for Philadelphia, so I don't really see the Nick Nurse. I could be completely wrong. This is very hard for me to predict, but that just doesn't seem like the best fit for me. So to me, it's between Milwaukee and Phoenix. And again, not a whole lot to go off of, but for me, I just think he would gravitate more towards a Milwaukee, Giannis, that kind of system. To me, that fits more his style than like this Phoenix team that has lots of questions with Ayton, Chris Paul's contract. You never know the stability of like a just absolutely superstar loaded roster. So to me, Milwaukee just makes the most sense for Nurse.
Yeah, I think Nurse probably ends up heading to Milwaukee as well. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Milwaukee just goes a different direction. Let's say Kenny Atkinson really, wins them over, or maybe even Adrian Griffin wins them over. But we'll see what happens, ladies and gentlemen. It is always a fun time in the NBA. Tweeted this out a little bit ago, but the NBA Finals starts June 1st. The possible Game 7 would be on June 18th. The NBA Draft is 4 days after that. And then free agency is 7 days after the draft. And then Summer League is 7 days after the first day of free agency. Never a dull day in the NBA. That's how it goes. It's a 12-month league. You're going to be watching the basketball. You're going to be enjoying the offseason news. You're going to be enjoying the NBA draft. And you can do it all here at the Objective Basketball Podcast. Lauren, any final words before we head out?
No, I think we touched on it all.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for tapping into the Objective Basketball Podcast. From Lauren, from myself, have a good one. We'll see you later.
Follow hosts at Just S Baraheni on all socials and at the Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.